She wore the crown as if it were hers. She walked through the hallways like a queen, even though no one ever called her that. But on that day, a royal guard within the palace didn't say a word. He just stepped into the king's room and put a sealed file on the table. 2 hours later, Camilla was called in. Her title was taken away, her crown was taken off, and the monarchy ended by royal decree, not to her, but to Prince William. Before we tell you what was in that sealed file, what made the crown leave her head, make sure you are subscribed to the channel with the bell notification on, and leave a comment letting us know where in the world you're watching from. Because this wasn't a revolt, it wasn't a whisper, it wasn't a scandal. The crown followed the order of a royal guard. It wasn't that Buckingham Palace hummed, it pressed. The hallways didn't echo, they listened, and that silence was starting to seem strange to Sergeant Rowan Annesley. 27 years with the Coldstream Guards, 3 times in Helmand, a persistent limp from an IED near Sangin. He wasn't the type of person to question orders, but something had changed in the palace's rhythm lately. That morning he stood outside the Rose Gallery, in full ceremonial dress, with a bright crimson tunic and a bearskin headdress that caught gold through the eastern windows. To most others, he appeared like stone. Rowan Annesley was constantly watching, though. Camilla had already passed by twice. Not surprising, because she lived here. But what she wore it wasn't one of her typical brooches or fitted coats. The royal family order sash, which was deep yellow and had the Queen's picture on it, was draped over her shoulders today. It was fastened with a diamond pin that hadn't been seen in public since Elizabeth's last year. You didn't merely wear it. It was deserved. Okay. Given. She acted like it wasn't there, nor at the coronation, nor at a state dinner. Simply wandering. The next day, she told 2 senior stewards to change the diplomatic procession, without asking the royal private secretary first. No permission, no doubt, just power that she used like it was always hers. Rowan had heard her tell the Danish foreign minister in a casual, offhand way, like talking about the weather. When the crown formally passes, we want to strengthen the Commonwealth relationship. We. The king is not his majesty, not even the family of the king. We. Rowan didn't move or flinch, but something inside him got tighter. The kind of quiet you experience before gunfire. It wasn't a protocol drift. It was taking on power. He could tell by the way staff instantly bowed their heads when she walked by, and how doormen struggled with bows that had once been sharp. The change was quiet and virtually unnoticeable. But for a soldier who had been trained to see danger in the slightest things, it was clear this wasn't a woman who played consort. This was a person that walked like they were already in charge, and a weight began to build deep in Rowan's chest. No fear, not mad, just something frigid, like a line that had just been crossed. He didn't say anything. He didn't even blink, but he knew what would happen next. It was a small party at Buckingham Palace to commemorate the new High Commissioners from 4 Commonwealth countries. There were just a gilded room, gleaming flooring, and handshakes between diplomats under oil paintings that were 200 years old. Sergeant Rowan Annesley was on duty at the Lancaster Room's north wall. He had kept watch over hundreds of these things, but never like this. There were officials from Canada, Belize, Australia, and Ghana among the gathering. Palace aides in the middle, a few high-ranking royals. There were quiet whispers between the polished shoes and the champagne flutes. Camilla came in next. She was late, but not because she was fashionable. She did it on purpose. Her entrance slashed through the room like a knife hidden in scent. She wore a pale blue dress that fit well, and the family order ribbon was still tied around her collar, making her stand out even from across the room. Her presence didn't demand attention. It thought it had already gotten it. Rowan stood still, weapon steady. His eyes followed the same path they had in Helmand, locking onto the angles that mattered. Camilla didn't wait for anyone to say hello. She proceeded from one guest to the next, hand outstretched, voice almost halfway through a phrase before the attendants could introduce her. Most of them nodded respectfully, but their eyes darted toward each other with doubt. Then it was time. A Canadian commissioner, who didn't know her status, spoke to her with diplomatic warmth. "It's a pleasure, Your Royal Highness." Camilla cut in. "Her Majesty," she said with a forced smile and no space for error. "We're glad to have you here on behalf of the realm." The word realm hung in the air like a blade that had fallen. The commissioner blinked. Ministers around became tense. A young steward looked down completely. A lord in foreign affairs coughed loudly into his drink from across the room. No one said anything to her. No one had the guts. Rowan heard it though. like a weapon being loaded in slow time. Your Majesty, not the Queen Consort, not Camilla, the king's wife, not even a careful diplomatic hedge, a king. The late queen's will, her bloodline, or the law did not give her the title, but she had worn it out loud in front of people from other countries, as if it were true. Rowan's jaw tensed even though he looked calm. He didn't even blink. He didn't do anything, but he felt it in his chest like a change in gravity, a moment that could not be undone. Because the line had not been crossed yet, someone had stepped over it, and the crown had not said anything. The palace halls didn't calm down that night. They took it in. Footmen murmured to each other in corners, while aides walked faster than normal. But the walls of Buckingham had been through a lot over the years, and knew how to deal with stress. Sergeant Rowan Annesley sat alone on the edge of his bunk in the Coldstream barracks. He was still in part of his dress uniform. His boots were dirty, his gloves were folded next to him, and his bearskin hat was on top of the locker, standing still. He looked straight ahead, with his hands resting on his thighs. A soldier who had been trained to survive IEDs, spot snipers, and stay in line while bullets flew by his boots, was not ready for this. This wasn't a war. This was something more peaceful. Slower, but just as risky. He had seen overreach before, in corrupt outposts and foreign ministers who tried to stretch power until it broke. And he had seen what occurred when men just stood there and said nothing. In the end, someone who shouldn't have authority would take it, wrap it in excuses, and call it legacy. He thought of Elizabeth, of how she used to stroll down these same halls with a heavy heart, but never once asked for respect. When she wore it, authority never had to say who it was. The air itself felt distorted, as if Camilla's remarks at the reception had hurt the crown without bleeding blood. And the worst part was that no one had stopped her, because there was no set way to do this. There is no apparent way to report a royal self-coronation. He couldn't give this to an assistant, couldn't send it through the household office. It would be stopped, hushed, and ignored. He would have to ask for a private meeting with the king, which no guard had done in decades. Not through a petition, not in passing, in person. He thought about every possible outcome of the decision: losing his job, being forced to retire, losing his rank, or being sent away from the institution. They would claim he went too far, that he had misunderstood, that he had gone crazy because of a false sense of responsibility, that years of standing stagnant had finally damaged something inside him. But he couldn't let the monarchy go off course without someone steering it and watching the throne turn into a negotiation instead of an inheritance. Couldn't just stand there, not after 27 years of making promises that meant something. Rowan rose up slowly, feeling the weight of his duty on his spine as if all those years had come together in that one moment. He got his gloves back, buttoned his tunic back up with the same care he had on his first day in uniform, and looked once more at the shiny glass over the sink. The man who glanced back at him didn't think twice. He turned around and marched down the hallway, his boots ringing in the empty barracks. He stepped into history the only way he knew how, one boot at a time. The request alone was enough to break the rules. Guards didn't ask for audiences with ministers, royals, or even the king. They stood, saluted, held doors, stayed in formation, and didn't talk unless someone asked them a straight question that needed more than yes sir or no ma'am. Sergeant Rowan Annesley, on the other hand, had made his plans obvious. No middlemen. There was no message sent through secretaries or aides who would massage the edges until the hurry wore off. He would wait outside the king's private study until he was called in or let go. He stood quietly under the arch of the south hall, his feet lined up with the edge of the inlaid marble border. His eyes were on the gold door at the other end. 2 hours went by, then 3. The numb palace workers strolled past with their heads down, muttering around ledges and looking at him like he was something that didn't belong, but no one wanted to move. One person even inquired if he was lost. He didn't say anything. He just stood there, breathing slowly and counting the seconds as he used to do in Helmand while he was waiting for word that the road ahead was clear. A steward came back just after the 4th hour. He was out of breath, and his cheeks were red like he had been running. "His Majesty will see you now." There was no ceremony when the doors opened. When people thought of royalty, they thought of the throne chambers and stately salons. But the king's private study was nothing like them. There is no chandelier, no velvet. There was just thick oak, dull light from a lamp, and bookcases full of books that were older than the empire itself. King Charles III sat in the middle, behind a writing desk with his glasses folded next to an unopened stack of letters. He didn't stand up or say hello. He only looked up, his eyes fatigued in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. "You're from Coldstream, right?" the king asked in a low voice. "Yes, Your Majesty." "How long have you worked here?" 27 years. 10 below her late majesty. Charles let out a slow, deliberate breath through his nostrils. I've heard. You were the one who stood in the rain for 8 hours without moving, when the power went out at Windsor. Yes, sir. Be quiet. Then Charles leaned back in his chair, fingers crossed, and looked at Rowan the way you look at something you don't want to understand. What could a soldier possibly say that would make us break every rule we still pretend to follow? Rowan looked him straight in the eye. Without a doubt, no negotiating. Truth was given to me in the same way that soldiers give it to each other, flat, clean, and inevitable. Forgive me, Your Majesty, but someone who was never named is claiming the crown. The room got colder. Not in a figurative sense, it really plunged, as if someone had opened a window to winter even though it was June outside. Charles didn't answer right away. He turned his head to look at a picture of Elizabeth on the wall. Her eyes were always serene, always looking, and always judging in that subtle way she had developed over the years. Finally, he remarked in a hushed voice, "She is my wife. She has been by my side through storms that would have killed another woman. She has given up more than anyone knows." Rowan didn't move. Giving up something does not give you power. The court, parliament, and the Commonwealth League all support her. Rowan didn't even blink. But not of the crown. Charles rose up slowly, using one hand to hold onto the edge of the desk as if he needed it to keep up. You don't know what it means to hold a kingdom together with threads. For my whole life, I've been yearning to serve, and now that I finally wear the crown, you want me to break apart the person who kept me going. Rowan's voice stayed steady. I would ask you to protect what the Queen worked so hard to keep safe for 70 years. Charles's fingers curled up a little, and his knuckles turned white against the dark wood. Rowan stepped forward, not in an angry or threatening way, but just enough to make sure everyone heard every word. Your Majesty, history will not remember fidelity to comfort, only loyalty to the king. And the crown isn't just for show, it is a promise. Again, silence. The wall clock behind the desk was the only thing that made noise, and it ticked slowly, recording seconds that seemed to last longer than they should. And one more thing, something that the king could scarcely see. Not mad, not disobedience, sadness. But not for Camilla. He understood what he had to do. Charles sat down in the chair, and his shoulders sagged as if the weight had finally become too great. He took a long, shaky breath, the kind that shakes your chest when you're trying not to cry. Then they picked up a silver bell that was next to the inkwell and rang it once. The sound was modest yet clear. Bring them here, he whispered softly. My wife and son. Rowan bowed once, quickly and sharply, and then turned to follow the order. The choice had been made, and now the monarchy would have to deal with it. No one had utilized the Cedar Room in years. It wasn't a place to celebrate because it was hidden behind the king's secret library and next to a long-forgotten antechamber of Queen Victoria's. It was for making decisions, small, plain, heavy with wood, and quiet, with a sense of importance that sunk into your lungs as soon as you walked in. There was a table set up, an ancient circular oak table with no crests or decorations. There were just 4 chairs, equally spaced, and in the middle was a leather folder with a gold-embossed royal cipher on it that caught the light from the bulb like a warning. It was just after 6, but the closed curtains made it seem later and darker, as if the room itself had been taken out of time. Now aides moved in a different way, quick, measured. They didn't look behind them anymore. They looked forward, at the door, at whatever was about to happen. People gave orders in hushed whispers. The guards at the end of the hall had been moved about, but not for safety reasons. Phones turned off, curtains closed. The kind of planning that happens only when history is about to change. Outside the room, Sergeant Rowan Annesley remained still with one gloved hand resting on the hilt of his sheathed bayonet. Over the years, he had done his fair share of ceremonial posts, such welcoming state visitors, celebrating anniversaries, and saying goodbye to important people whose names he had forgotten before they went. But this didn't feel like any of those. This was a time of reckoning, not a time of celebration. Charles waited alone in the room. He sat there without a crown or sash, without the ceremonial weight that usually came with him in official settings. He was wearing a dark navy suit, and his eyes had aged in the course of a day. Then there were footsteps. Prince William was the first to go through the door. He didn't say anything when he got in. He wore a dark gray suit with a straight collar. There were no assistants behind him, and his face was blank except for the kind of stillness that comes from knowing exactly what's about to happen and not flinching. He sat down across from his father and nodded once, keeping his mouth shut. Camilla showed up a minute later. As she walked in, her heels pounded quietly on the marble. She stood upright, with her chin slightly raised, not royal but defiant. She wore light ivory and the Queen's family order ribbon over her left shoulder, as usual. She didn't inquire why she was called. She didn't have to. Her gaze moved over the table, taking in the folder, William, and lastly Charles, who she looked at with a mix of expectation and alarm. "Is this a decision or a discussion?" she asked in a calm but sharp voice. Charles didn't say anything. Rowan did, though. She spoke softly, so her voice didn't carry across the room, but it slashed through it like a knife. "Ma'am, you were called to see an order, not to argue about it." Camilla moved a little toward him, and there was a little crease of anger on her brow, as if she had just been told off by furniture that had the nerve to speak, but she didn't say anything because she already knew. The door shut behind her with a weight that wasn't wood or brass, but history. And now, for the first time since Elizabeth died, 4 people were in the same room. They weren't relatives or royals. They were the people who had to decide what to do with a legacy that was starting to fall apart. No titles, no press. There was no ceremony, just the truth, and a choice that would change the room. There wasn't a lack of noise in the cedar room. It was pressure, the kind that builds up when too many realities have been kept secret for too long. Charles opened the packet with great care. The parchment inside was thick and cream-colored, and the ink was still faintly shining where it had just been sealed. He started with, "I will speak plainly," his voice firm yet strained. "There are times when the crown needs to change its own course, not out of spite, not out of anger, but it has to do it." Camilla's eyes got smaller. "And you think I've made a mistake?" Charles didn't say anything. He just pushed the paper toward her, face up. She didn't touch it, stared. The royal seal looked back at me. The red wax was pressed into the paper and was still there. Underneath that, the title read, "By order of the sovereign. Revocation of title and removal of consort privileges." Her breath left her like a thread breaking. "You can't be serious." Charles's voice didn't get louder. "This is not a punishment. It is fixing. You think you can just take off a crown with ink and wax?" "No," Charles responded softly, "but I can tell it where it goes." Camilla laughed, a quick biting chuckle that sounded almost like she didn't believe it. "After all I've done to keep this family together, the teasing, the headlines, the years of pretending to be perfect while you—" Her voice broke. The mask loosened just enough to show how angry she was. "You let her ghost control you," she said angrily. "You wear her memory like armor, and say it's your duty. Elizabeth is no longer here. The world has changed. The crown needs strength, not memories." Charles stayed still. "The crown needs the truth. And what is that truth? You thought being close meant having power." The words hit like a slap. William looked at his father, then back at Camilla, who quickly stood up. The sound of the chair legs scraping across the floor was too loud in the small room. "I have stood by you when no one else would," she added. "I've been carrying the weight of public hate for decades, and now that they finally bow without flinching, you want to take it from me?" Charles's hands shook a little, but his voice stayed steady. "You took something that wasn't yours." Camilla leaned forward with her hands flat on the table. "I am the crown's stability." Charles answered in a low voice, "No, you are its shadow." The room stopped moving. The old clock's ticking even seemed to stop for a moment. Rowan didn't move or breathe. William didn't say anything, and his face was hard to read. But his eyes spoke something. Not a win, not pity, just something that has to happen. Charles reached for a second envelope that was under the first one. It was smaller and had a single royal cipher, "1 it." He pointed it at his son. The continuity must not break. William didn't grab it soon away. "Father," Charles said, "it's not a question." William let out a deep breath and looked down at the envelope. For a long time, his fingers hovered above it until he eventually took it. He didn't open it. He didn't have to. He already knew what was in it. Camilla's voice got softer, almost like she was begging. "Charles, think. You will kindle a fire that won't go out. The press will eat you alive. Parliament will ask you about your stability. You can't take this back." Charles looked up at her, tired but determined. "You're right. No, I can't. But the crown can." He looked at Rowan. "Sergeant Annesley, Your Highness, you will bring this document to the Privy Council, effective right away." Rowan went up, took the sealed order with a quick nod, and then stepped back. Camilla looked at him in shock, her face showing every line of disbelief. "You can't expect them to see this. It's a soldier's word against mine." Rowan looked back at her, calm and still. "It's not my word, ma'am. His Majesty's." His tone was so definitive that there was no room for a response. Camilla's lips opened, but she didn't say anything. The sound that came out instead wasn't rage or horror. It was more like loss, something that broke but didn't quite break. She didn't say anything for a long time. Then she straightened her shoulders, adjusted her sleeve, and spoke as if she were dictating to an unseen recorder. She did this with all the grace of someone who didn't want the world to witness her fall apart. Then I hope you remember this moment when the crown starts to rust. She turned around and left. No crying, no stumbles. The sound of her heels receding away down the hall until there was nothing left. The room let out a breath. Charles didn't look up. William still hadn't taken the envelope out. Rowan stood at attention, holding the sealed order in his gloved hands. His face was blank, but his eyes were sharp with what seemed like sadness. Finally, the king spoke, but it was mostly to the chamber and not to anyone in it. History won't look back on this with fondness. Rowan didn't think twice before answering. Sir, history never does. It just recalls what people did. The next morning, the press release was easy to read. Not even 30 words. His Majesty the King has ordered that the title and obligations of Queen Consort be ended. The sovereign's plan for the succession stays the same. No reason given. No more details. Just the cold, clear movement of monarchy. That afternoon, pictures came out. The royal guard changing shifts outside Buckingham, the sash taken out of its case, and the balcony empty for the first time since the coronation. And in the core of it all was a single picture taken from below with a long lens. Sergeant Rowan Annesley stood outside the king's room, silent as a rock, with a folded decree in his hand, and the crown's reflection faintly shining in the window behind him. The caption was simply, "The guard who spoke," but no one within the palace said his name again.